Welcome to Wild Places. I'm your host, Brad Clement. This podcast is presented by Panji Foundation, saving snow leopards, helping communities. So, Luis Benitez, do you remember the first time we met?
You know, I was thinking about this, Brad, before we got on, and you've spent as much time at high altitude as I have, so the memory's a little fuzzy. It's either at a restaurant in Kathmandu on our way into an expedition where we talked about both having family in St. Louis and making that connection, or it was actually on the way to or at Everest Base Camp, was my recollection. Are both of those completely wrong?
Both are completely wrong.
Oh my God. See? There you go.
So let me, for our viewers and listeners, I should mention that, yes, you and I both grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, the pretty much the epicenter of high altitude mountaineering. And we're
Exactly.
roughly the same age.
Yeah.
We grew up within miles of each other.
Yeah.
And yet the first time we met was on Mount Everest. We were at about 19,000 feet.
Wow. So it wasn't even base camp. It was on the hill. God.
It was on the hill. It was not in base
credit.
camp.
I was in the right country. It was in Nepal.
And I was filming for Discovery Channel.
That's right.
And you were you were guiding on Everest, and you were bringing down your team, and I was going up filming this person. And the guy I was filming almost got in a fist fight with one of your clients. And you and I, who had never met before, kind of calmed the situation down.
See, I totally blocked that part out, but now that you tell me, oh my God, I completely remember that.
Yeah. And then so Will, the guy I was filming, who still great friends with, and you knew Will.
Yeah.
Will was like, yeah, Luis is from St. Louis. And then once back in base camp, after settling the chaos down,
that's right.
We talked, and that's how we first became friends.
And Brad, what year was that? Was that 2004?
That was 2004.
Yeah. That's right, because Will Cross did a couple of expeditions, and I think he was on the mountain in 2004 and 2006 or 2008, something like that.
Yeah.
Good memory, and that I blocked that part out. I try to only remember the good things.
And so, eventually in this conversation today on this podcast, I want to talk about your transition from guiding into really beautiful work. You've worked with Governor Hickenlooper, but now Senator Hickenlooper. You're now working for the VF Corporation, which includes brands like the North Face, huge, but Timberland, all sorts of really cool Vans, all sorts of really cool things. What I see in you now, knowing you for so long, is you've transitioned beautifully from guiding into different aspects, but all about the outdoors. And what I see in you is it's always been about promoting, but also protecting the outdoors. And that's really cool to me.
Very much so. Very much.
But your life, how did you begin guiding? Like, what happened in your early stages of life that said, hey, I want to be in the outdoors?
Well, it's, Brad, you and I have talked about this before. It's sort of like that Talking Heads song. This is not my beautiful house. This is not how did I get here? It's being two kids from the Midwest. I got lucky in a few places. And I think the first and foremost being my father being from an immigrant from Ecuador. So, while I spent my, school years in the heartland, every summer was spent in Ecuador visiting my grandparents and the entire half of my family. And so my love of the big mountains really came from from that. One of my father's brothers was a guide, as a hobby, not as a profession. But in Ecuador, the climbing clubs are a lot like, soccer clubs and semi-professional league clubs, where it's serious. Like it's like the Hogwarts, and what house do you join, what club you were a part of, in the 80s was really defined by how you climb, the style you climb, the friends you kept. And I got pulled into that culture in Ecuador as a teenager. So coming back to the Midwest to just keep dreaming a little dream during the school year was really hard. And so, like most of us that were wired that way, the first opportunity I had to point myself west, I took it, and that came in the form of working for the Colorado Outward Bound School as an instructor. So came west. My father's grand plans of going to law school, and going on to get into politics, that just completely fizzled and went away at that time. And Outward Bound at that time in the 90s, was really where, a lot of the heroes of American mountaineering, would pass through. Mark Udall, was then the leader of the school, then became our senator here in Colorado, but was really known as a high altitude climber and mountaineer. Kitty Calhoun Grissom, Jan Reynolds, Wally Berg, Pete Athens, the list goes on and on and on. And I was lucky enough to get in just at the right time, at the right place, to be the snotty little kid that wouldn't leave all of these people alone, because my dream was to figure out how to go to bigger mountains, all over the world. That was really what I wanted to do.
So, how many times have you stood on top of Everest, and do you get sick of people asking you that question?
I don't. But the funny thing is now, with a lot of the social media channels that were just starting when I started to evolve out of full-time guiding a few years ago, Dave Hahn, I think Dave Hahn's at 15 summits. Kenton Cool, who's another really great friend from the UK, just completed his 15th summit. So when I tell people I have 6, I've only been on top 6 times. To me, that feels kind of like, that's small. And then when you think about the Sherpa community, whom you and I are great friends with, I know you've got some of the same friends that I do that have been on top 20 plus times. Like, Kami Sherpa just did his 21st ascent, I believe. So, it's, I'm honored to have spent a lot of my life on the mountain, but there are people out there with way more than me.
But that time of your life, years. I mean, okay, so
Years.
6 summits.
Yeah.
How many days that involves on that mountain? And
well, I mean, you can do quick back of the napkin math. Each expedition is about 3 months long. So, and I actually been on Everest 7 times, didn't summit one year. So that's 3 times 7 is a significant chunk of your life.
and that meant something to you. I mean, you fell in love with the Himalaya.
I really did. And I got there in kind of a, like most careers, there's a apprenticeship, there's a pecking order. You've got to kind of go at a certain speed. You have to prove yourself in certain places before you get invited to the big show and you get to go to the Himalayas or some of the bigger mountain ranges. And for me, again, is where I think I got a little lucky. One, growing up going to altitude in Ecuador, by the time I was, 19, 20, 21, I had been up Chimborazo multiple times in Ecuador, which is higher than Denali. So that's not a common thing necessarily. So working for Outward Bound and bugging all of my heroes, like, hey, I'll happily go work for free on something that, Wally Berg, Pete Athens, and Mark Udall got so sick and tired of me asking and bugging them. They finally brought me to Todd Burleson in Seattle, who
AAI, Alpine Ascents.
Alpine Ascents, and said, "Just do something with this kid because he won't leave us alone." And Todd, and I'll always be grateful to him for this, didn't put me on Rainier or Baker or Shuckson, the usual, Pacific Northwest, climb the volcanoes, 3,000 times rotation before we send you anyplace else.
Dude, I've done Baker, I think 63 times.
Well, and this is where I start to feel a little guilty because of my Spanish and because of where I came from. Todd immediately sent me to Aconcagua, which is one of the 7 summits. So I got, in my opinion, for me, that was fast tracking because of my language and because of my altitude. Altitude experience. I immediately got sent down there, and then from there, got to go home and work trips in Ecuador, and then also went to Peru. So, Latin America was my home turf for a long time. And so I split my time between, guiding for AI, working for Outward Bound, like, most outdoor industry dirtbags would do. And then Eric Weinmeier called in 2000. Well, actually, 99. So in 1999, a group of Outward Bound instructors, we went and tried to climb Gangapurna, which is in the Annapurna mountain range, just
Yep. Yep.
three small alpine style, like 7,500 meter, mountain with, an 8,000 meter wall. Like we had no business being there. It's a miracle we didn't get ourselves killed. But that was, all self-funded, self-paid team from Colorado. And, came home with our tail between our legs, but really learned a lot, like about the scale of climbing in the Himalaya, how to do it, what we were really invested in. And for me, I was hooked. But I credit a lot of this opportunity to, a Sherpa, as most things in the Himalayas are credited to. We had a Sherpa on my team that was really good friends with Pasquale Scarturo, who was also in Denver. And he just said, "Hey, could you carry this present back to PV?" His name's Pasquale Vincenzo Scarturo, good Italian boy. And I said, "Sure, absolutely." So I brought this little gift back from Kami, sat down with PV for lunch and said, just back from Himalayas, Kami sent you this. And, like most mountaineers do, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I've got this trip I'm putting together for this guy, Eric Weinmeier. He's a blind climber. He's been up Denali. He's been up Kilimanjaro, and he wants to go to Everest. It's going to be pretty fun, and he's always looking for people to help him belay him on, various stuff. So if you're interested in, working with him and having fun, I'll put you on the list." He didn't say Everest. He didn't say, what the plan was, but, I at the time hadn't met Eric, but over climbing with him a little bit more and sort of working with him, ice climbing, rock climbing, a little bit of mountaineering, here and there, just started to become friends. And eventually their plan, to go to Everest, in 2001, came to light. And when I heard that, what am I going to need to do to get put on this team? What can I do? And I knew it was going to be, I thought at the time, very, very, difficult competition to get on this team. When the reality is, no mountaineer with a resume wanted to touch that trip with a 10-foot pole because they were worried about, the inevitable accident that they thought was going to happen. You're going to get Eric killed, and as a guide, you're going to destroy your career because who's ever going to want to climb with the guy that got a blind person intentionally killed on Everest? So a lot of professional mountaineers just passed. And so it finally boiled down to a all Colorado team, 80% of whom had never been to the Himalayas before, but had years and years experience guiding and instructing.
That's interesting. So I'm longtime friends with Chris Morris because we used to
There you go.
guide on Denali and in Alaska all the
Yep.
time. And then now I know Charlie Mace really well. And it's funny, the crew that was put together for that team was perfect. It was perfect.
I mean, total band of misfits at the time, but looking back on it, we're all still friends. A lot of us still climb together. And it's, it's kind of amazing. And I think, Eric and PV had this uncanny knack of picking folks on that crew that were used to being told that they you shouldn't do that. You probably aren't capable of doing that. You shouldn't even try. And a lot of folks on that team were used to, Chris Morris as well, saying, "Really? Watch." So there was a lot of testosterone, a whole lot of ego, but a lot of really hard training as well. We went to Ama de Blam as a quote unquote training trip, in 2000. Failed miserably because it was the year that it was such a low snow year. What we thought was going to be a little bit easier terrain to navigate with Eric just turned into a mixed, loose alpine rock climb at altitude. And so we bailed, and global media said, "See, there you go. That's what we were talking about. They can't even get up Amada Blam and they think they're going to go to Everest and succeed. Wow, that's not going to happen. And in 2001, we went. Everybody summited from our team. Everybody came back safe, happy, reasonably healthy, and that changed the trajectory of my career. It was one of those opportunities, having already been working for a Seven Summits company and completely jumping the queue to get to go to Everest in a really highly visible way. Todd spotted a marketing opportunity a mile away and just started slotting me for the big trips, because we were getting so much media visibility at the time.
So that ingrained you into the Himalaya. And then I'm going to jump, kind of fast forward a bit to the Nang Pala,
Mhm.
Choyu. Choyu is the sixth highest mountain in the world. You were leading a trip there, and really bad stuff happened. There were people killed by Chinese military, and you were the only person to reach out to say, "Look, this is what's happening." Now,
Yeah. Ugh,
that
yeah.
that changed your. You just mentioned trajectory in the guiding world, and that altered that world.
Significantly. And it from 2001 to that incident, I was on a full-time Seven Summits track. And not only was I on a set, just living out of a duffel bag, guiding the Seven Summits year after year, with a couple of other fun mountains thrown in, like Amada Blam and Choyu and Shishapangma and others. It was the life that I had dreamed of. And I was no longer with Alpine Ascents. At the time, I had moved over to Adventure Consultants, the Kiwi company, to help them get back to being a global brand, because after they lost Rob Hall in 96, even by 2003-ish, they still hadn't gotten back their Kilimanjaro trips, their Vincent trips. They didn't have an Ecuador program. So I really joined to help them expand back out to being, a true global player in the space, was doing what I loved. And that was it. That was the sum of my ambitions. But if you really pay attention to what we were talking about in the beginning, my connection from a purpose perspective to the outdoor industry, I explained the mountaineering side, but my American grandfather also owned a sporting goods store in St. Louis. So the small family specialty retail side of my life started when before I could even walk. And fly fishing and hunting was very much a big part of my childhood as well. So when I tell people I was sort of a one-trick pony, and all kidding, the outdoor industry is what I've grown up in. It's what I've always known. And so being at that level was sort of the sum of my ambitions. But if you kind of look at some of the pieces that stacked up to that moment, from being an outward bound instructor to being, a lot of guides never really liked going into a country a couple days early to deal with permits and paperwork and trying to figure out insurance policies for your in-country labor, the folks that would be working for you. And I love that. I absolutely love the policy side of the job, and trying to understand how our industry could stand for something bigger and something better than just coming in and utilizing a resource like a mountain, paying a couple of local folks, and then leaving. I wanted to understand what the longer game was. And in 2006 in Choyu, to your point, the Nang Pala shooting, not only did it change my perspective of what the industry was capable of, but also what I thought my place in that industry could or should be. Mm-hmm. So to your comment, much like the border with Mexico here in the United States, there's a very low pass that connects Nepal to Tibet. Mm-hmm. On the shoulder of Choyu, Tibetan refugees utilize this pass to escape Tibet, cross through Nepal, and get to where the Tibetan government in exile resides in Dharamsala, India. And all of this as a guide and as someone that travels and works in these countries. But when you see Chinese Border Patrol soldiers a quarter mile away from base camp, kneeling in the snow and indiscriminately shooting towards refugees that are running away from them uphill at 18,000 feet, your brain just, it takes a lot to register. And
killing
yes.
people.
Yes, and murdering a few folks right there, half a mile away from where you're standing. in complete daylight. And, we were heading up for our summit push when all this was going on. I thought by the time we would come back down to base camp afterwards, it was an international incident. The world was going to know.
Mhm.
But the reality is, there was sort of this at the time, an unspoken code that no expedition leader we didn't want to make waves. Nobody wanted to lose their permits or their access. And I think the justification that a lot of folks brought to the table was, we employ Tibetans. We do a lot of good for the country. This is terrible, but it's not our business because this isn't an international incident. We're not politicians. Stay out of it. This is where, to your point, something just shifted. And I realized that if I didn't do everything I could to bring this to light, that I wasn't, I was doing a disservice to all the people I had worked with over the years, all the friends I had made, because it wasn't just about getting up and down a mountain and leaving. It was about the connectivity of this industry globally. And so, we have mutual friends at a global website, Explorers Web. I called Tom and Tina on my satellite phone, and I said, "Listen, here's what's going on. This is what's happened. I'm going to write a story, and you're going to need to post it as is. There's going to be zero time to fact check it, because it's still going on. There are still soldiers in base camp, but you're just going to have to trust me that everything I'm about to tell you is real." And to Tom and Tina's forever credit, they trusted me enough as good friends to post my story as is, and all hell broke loose. Chinese soldiers picked up the story. They came back into base camp, confiscated satellite phones, wanted to know who wrote the story, who did it. And I won't bore you with all the escape from Tibet details, but it was a pretty harrowing experience to get out of Tibet. The expedition was obviously over, season was over, to get back to Nepal and fly home.
And Tibet is essentially China. It is China.
Well, occupied Tibet. Yes, it is China.
Dealing with the Chinese infrastructure at that point.
Very much so.
And that decision, I know it was covered in Men's Journal. Like, they did a whole story about you. That was cool. But that changed your trajectory.
It did.
You left the world of guiding. You were. Is it too strong to say that you were blackballed a bit because you were honest? You brought to the world a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, I think blackballed is probably the best word to use.
Yeah.
After the incident, and there were a lot of different pieces that were involved with it, and I tried to keep, guiding was my love, my passion, it was my focus, and I sort of naively thought I could keep my day job while doing this other thing, which involved working for the international campaign for Tibet. I testified in front of the Spanish High Court that tried Wu Jintao in absentia for crimes against humanity. Testified in front of The Hague. Collaborated on a BBC documentary, and like you said, other magazines picked up the story. And I think at the time thought, well, I could do all this to do as much as I could and still keep the day job. And what I realized at the time was it was making it harder and harder for adventure consultants to do business, because it's a very connected community. You get your oxygen supplied from this person, you get your permits over here, and the more noise you make, the harder it is to do those things effectively and safely. And the last thing I wanted to do was bring reputational risk to adventure consultants, or physical risk to any of the clients that I work with. So to your point, I made the conscious choice to step away from guiding full time and go into more independent guiding, and start to think about, well, what the heck am I supposed to do next? And in that process, the blackballing, that came with it was an incredibly difficult period in my life, because you kind of have to hit the reset button and say, it's the old classic story. And I think you hear it from a lot of quote unquote whistleblowers, who really are your good friends, who are the folks that stand by you with this, and who are the folks that don't. And for me, that reset button was really an evaluation of, if I truly love this industry at that level, and I'm willing to step into this, then you're no longer just a mountain guide. You have to think about being something different. And that started a completely separate journey in my life.
and yet your the journey wasn't that different in that it still focuses around the outdoors and a passion for promoting and protecting the outdoors. Now, you've done some really cool stuff, Luis. You've worked with the Wharton School of Business, executive leadership. Of course, Outward Bound also involves those facets. But then you entered in, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your job with the state of Colorado, kind of leading this outdoor recreation industry position. Was that the first of its kind in the US? I think it may have been.
That's a great question. Well, it was a tie between Utah and Colorado, and it was really a battle between then Governor Herbert and Governor Hickenlooper because they both saw the need, and didn't quite know how they were going to get there, or what it was going to look like. And I'll share with you sort of the true transition point, Brad, because it's a story that I don't often tell. Through my work with the International Campaign for Tibet, I was getting ready to go back to Everest, was literally packing in the garage, and the phone rang, and it was the Dalai Lama's special envoy in Washington, D.C., who said, Luis, His Holiness has heard about your work on behalf of the Tibetan people, and he'd love to meet you. And I thought at the time, well, that's very flattering. Obviously, I'll be respectful. I'll come to Dharamsala. I thought it was just going to be a friendly meet and greet, a handshake, and a picture. And I'd go back to Kathmandu, keep packing for Everest, and away we would go. And through scheduling conflicts on his side, and sort of, the universe operating the way it does, it turned into a 45-minute conversation about culture and community with him, his interpreter, myself, and two International Campaign for Tibet warriors. And I had the audacity in that moment to say to him just the loss that I had gotten from this experience. I had lost friends, work, my career was shifting.
Audacity is fantastic.
Yeah, like boo-hoo,
Yeah,
poor
yeah.
Louise. And I look back still to this day and cringe. But he had the most wonderful response that truly was the pivot point. He laughed like to the point I thought he was going to cry. And he said through his interpreter, "Yeah, Luis, I'd still love to live in the Patala Palace and be my people's spiritual and temporal leader in Tibet, but I'm in government in exile in a different country. So basically, sorry, kid, you can't always get what you want. I feel for you.
Get over it, dude.
Yeah, get over it, buddy." But what he said next was I think the moment that it all changed. He said, "Luis, sometimes you don't choose your path. Sometimes your path chooses you. And now it's going to be up to you how you want to show up. It's going to be up to you to decide if you're actually going to listen to that." And after that, I came back to Colorado, was doing a little bit of guiding, but started working for Outward Bound. It was also working for Vail Resorts, helping them build an internal university, which was also working with Wharton. So, my philosophy was, if I could influence leadership of our global multi-billion-dollar economy in the outdoor industry, maybe things like the Nang Pala incident, the aftermath could be different. So I thought if I could get my hands on leadership in all these different pieces, that we could change the game a little bit. Ended up running for office in Eagle, Colorado, where I lived, got elected as the youngest councilman there. And that's how I got put on Governor Hickenlooper's radar. Here was this crazy kid with a wild story that was, spending money on trail systems in Eagle instead of spending money on a new sewage treatment facility. Like, why is he doing that? Why does he believe so much in the outdoor economy? And being the first director when there was really no roadmap, and sharing that journey with as a Democrat state with a Republican director in Utah, I really for the first time saw that, our industry, can get past the political stripe. We could actually communicate the love of place, the purpose of stewardship, and the connectivity to public health, how we help grow an economy, how we help deliver on promises of education and workforce development. And for the first time, I had full permission to go off and try to do the thing that I had been thinking about since the Nang Pala, which was, could you actually build a political voice for our industry and for our economy?
And so now with the VF Corporation, you're not only running certain aspects of that company, but you're in charge of their philanthropic endeavors. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I oversee global government affairs. So we're in over 100 countries with over 50,000 employees. And so careful what you wish for, Brad, because on any given day, in some country somewhere, there's something going on with some government that requires a little bit of involvement, be it from our supply chain to the way we responsibly source materials, to labor issues, to human rights issues, all the way to how we engage within the climate conversation and circular economies. And our foundation, which is a $10 million a year philanthropic organization, we really try to put funds on the ground in communities where we live, work, and play that's attached to our purpose. So, it's interesting. I had no intention of going back to the private sector. I loved working for Governor Hickenlooper. Governor Polis, when he took over, was nice enough to invite me to stay, and I had transitioned to his administration. And at the time, we were convincing other governors to create the outdoor industry offices. Now we're a coalition of over 20 states that have the office, so that's a significant political voice and construct. But the CEO of VF, Steve Rendell, who's an amazing guy, just said, Luis, we can change the conversation about the industry as a Fortune 250 company if we choose to deepen our engagement around purpose. And if I looked back on the trajectory of every job I ever had, that purpose-driven ability is really what connected me to the work. And so I was intrigued, and here I am 2 years later.
So, so you mentioned purpose. Has anything changed from when you were a kid spending summers in Ecuador with the other half of your family to where you are now? It's about the outdoors, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you say that. It's always been about the outdoor industry at some facet of the industry. And I think for me at this point, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way, it always will be. There's this immense constellation of people that have focused their entire professional trajectories around pieces of our ecosystem. And, when I look at VF's, purpose and mission statement, we power movements of sustainable and active lifestyles for the betterment of people and our planet. If I look at every job I've had from Outward Bound to now, there's been some facet of betterment of people or betterment of planet in everything I've tried to do. And it's interesting being in a company that puts it on paper, and tries to get some of those things done through our brands or for us as a holding company. And, I think in the future, there will be this blend of public sector and private sector connectivity to move the needle even further. And I don't think a lot of politicians are happy with that connectivity right now. They want business people to stay business people, and they want let politics be politics. But I think the days of keeping those things separate are ending. And I think that deeper connectivity of how we engage some of these things is just beginning. And so for me, it's always going to be this journey of how can I make who we are and what we do better.
Do you ever still get a chance to just go outside and enjoy, whether it's the stars at night or touching rock, or do you ever, do you still get to feel the outside?
Yeah, it's interesting, Brad. The thing to hear the public health conversation right now about the outdoors and how much it's helped during the pandemic, that people have rediscovered how much it helps mental health, how much it helps physical health, that it's sort of this new discovery for a lot of people. The outdoor industry has been one of the industries that has advanced through the pandemic and hasn't receded. And we have hard data now with returning veterans that shows that time outside can impact traumatic brain injury recovery, PTSD recovery. There are now over 13 countries in the world where doctors can prescribe time outside instead of a course of medication. It's called forest bathing. The Japanese came up with it. And for me, to your question, there are times in my life when I've lost my way, gotten too busy, too many things have been going on where I didn't have that touchstone ability. I wasn't going outside to just sit on a rock, stare at my toes, feel the wind and allow that connection to recharge me. And when I look back on my life, those have been the most difficult periods because it has been a loss of that. But I find that the times when I've had that connectivity, and yes, absolutely, it's a priority in my life to have that. If not every single day, every other day. And having a young daughter, a lot of that time, the past couple of years has been doing it by headlamp, which has been even more fun. But getting out there and enjoying it and just sitting and being in that space, the other piece of my story that we haven't talked about is when I was very little, I was an incredibly sick little kid. I had really debilitating asthma and allergies. And in St. Louis with the humidity, as my life was in the hospital for the most part. And when I finally got to a point where I was starting to outgrow it through physical endeavors like swimming and hiking and running and climbing, my mom likes to say, once you figured out you could go outside again, you just never came back in. And so for me, spending time outside, I have a very visceral reaction to losing that because I equivocate it to mental and physical health from being a really sick little kid.
So, what's the best way to ensure wilderness for generations to come?
I have kind of a provocative stance on that, Brad. And I work for a collection of brands. So this one's going to be even more curious. For the longest time, I think we as Americans have gotten a whole lot of something for a whole lot of nothing. Our public lands, our available green spaces. We have this expectation, much like infrastructure and roads and social services like healthcare. We expect our taxes to cover everything that we need, everything that we use, and everything that we want. And with the increase in consumption rates, with more people discovering the outdoors, which is great, more people buying tents and backpacks. Thank you. You can't help keep me employed. Love it. Yet the challenges that I think we're going to face moving into the next 10 or 15 years will be less about conservation and I think more about stewardship, how we define the protection of these places. It's like the old story of, the PTO has to hold a bake sale to help pay teachers, but the Defense Department has no trouble finding billions of dollars to build the next great fighter jet. I think as you start to see things come out of Washington, D.C., like, 30 for 30, the America the Beautiful Act, these are going to be billions of dollars are going to be brought to the table to help restore the infrastructure of the great outdoors. But I think we as consumers and citizens have to think about our level of investment when it comes to equitable access to the outdoors. And so I'm not necessarily saying that everybody needs to pay, $5 every year to be allowed to go hike. I don't think we as Americans will ever, it's our birthright. And a conversation that we need to have. But I think about how we factor in paying for a lot of these things. That conversation needs to evolve. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, it's been a conversation for the hunting and fishing community, which, the revenue from hunting and fishing licensures really covers a lot of conservation efforts in a lot of states. As the hunting and fishing numbers level off, there's this big question of, well, what's the revenue structure? How do we continue to invest in our local communities to help these things come to life? Mm-hmm. You combine that with the conversation with the tribes around, when we say public lands to whom, who came before us and what is their investment level and where is their seat at the table for these conversations. So the exciting thing to me is we're entering this new era of the status quo is no longer going to be enough. We're going to have a different conversation about honoring the tribes that came before us, what that means historically for conservation and stewardship, and then how we take care of this infrastructure and ecosystem moving forward. And that includes continuing to discover our political voice in this process. I don't think we've gotten there yet.
Have you ever sat back and looked at yourself in the mirror and thought, wow, I just started climbing mountains and now I'm able to be a voice in policy?
Oh, Brad, I could ask the same thing about you, about your journey to becoming a filmmaker and a storyteller. And I think the interesting thing for our industry, and this is my own personal belief, is that we're all storytellers at heart. And this goes back to the tribes, it goes back to indigenous peoples. There is this concept of gathering around the bonfire and telling the stories of where we've come from and where we want to go. And it's the inspiration of gathering around that fire under an open sky that we rediscover our inspiration. And for me, and I think I said it earlier, the sum of my ambition, when you and I met at Camp One, trying to break up what was sure to be an impending fist fight on Everest, like that was the sum of my end. All I ever wanted to do was be a mountain guide. And at some point I thought, own a guide service. I'll be the old crusty guide service owner that would dole out the trips. I'd sit in a rocking chair and, tell stories. And that was going to be it. I do reflect often on that journey to be in this place. And I think it's my push every day is it kind of goes back to what the Dalai Lama said to me. If you're capable of doing more and you don't, then that's on you. You have to be very clear that if you're capable of telling a story in a larger way, like you are as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, if you're capable of getting involved in policy, maybe not at the federal level or the state level or even the local level. When I ran for town council in Eagle, I thought, this is great. I'm involved in policy. I love my town. I'm proud to walk down Main Street and talk to other citizens in my town. I thought that was going to be it till the governor called. And then I thought that was going to be it till we started going to DC and building a coalition of other states with the same job. And then I thought that was going to be it until VF came along and we started having these conversations, in the Asia Pacific region and with the EU for EMEA. You always have to ask yourself, if your journey is always trying to figure out what more you can do, that's great. But if your journey is, this is what I want to do, and I'm really happy playing at this level, then play your best game. Because our industry and our natural resources, we have this amazing opportunity in the next 7 to 10 years. And this is our moment to be able to say, we are worth billions of dollars as a national economy. We're responsible for millions of American jobs. We are a larger economy than the auto industry and the oil and gas industry combined in the United States. Yet we do not show up like that in Washington, D.C. We do not show up like that at the state level. And we definitely don't show up like that at the city council level because we haven't finished galvanizing our voice yet. But the moment that we do, I think our capacity for change is going to be bigger than we've ever seen before. And I get told all the time, well, yeah, Luis, that's great, but it's partisan. I can't get the dirt bikers to talk to the mountain bikers. I can't get the hunting folks to talk to the birding folks. It's too segregated. It's too difficult to gather everyone under one tent. And, the story that I like to tell at a smaller scale was when I first started working for the governor and was building an advisory council. I didn't go to the usual suspects for every single segment of the industry. What I did is I asked one very simple question. Who's the one person in your segment of the industry where if I said their name out loud, to everybody else, they would say, "Oh, Brad, yeah. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, if you're going to have a filmmaker represent the documentary film industry for your council, we all know Brad. Some people love him, some people hate him, but we all know Brad." And I did that for every segment of the industry. And there were times when, for council meetings, I thought the mountain biking person and the dirt biking person were going to throw each other through a window. But there were times where I literally physically locked the door and said, "We're not leaving this room till we come up with at least one piece of forward momentum."
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I think it's fantastic when some people hate you and some people love you. You
That means
wouldn't
you're doing something right, in my opinion.
yeah, you don't want everyone to love you. You know, difference can be great.
Yep, I agree.
Difference of opinions, and then exploring why there are difference of opinions is it's progress in its infancy.
Well,
And
that's what makes us us.
yeah,
Say what you want about Don Trump Jr., but the guy posts more hunting and fishing pictures than anything else. And yes, he went out as a big game hunter and did all kinds of horrible things in Africa. And you can get into all of that. But even someone like him, if you get past the political stuff, believes in conservation and stewardship. There's a common ground for everyone within the industry where you can find a place where you're talking about what you love and how you want to protect, defend it, and promote it for the next generation beyond the partisanship. And we have this unique opportunity to continue advancing towards that place. And when we've already made significant strides. When even 6 years ago, when people in DC used to see us coming, they thought, "Oh, tree huggers, the environmentalists, the granola eaters, everybody hide. They're going to ask us for money and political support." And now we show up in DC saying, "Elected official so-and-so, we are worth X jobs in your district that bring in Y amount of tax revenue. And we'd like to talk to you about some of our things. And are you not interested in economic development? Are you not interested in job creation?" There's not an elected official on earth that would turn away from that conversation.
right, right. So, speaking of next generation, what's the future for your daughter? What are you thinking for her?
God, it's so wild being a parent, Brad. Like, when I think about myself now to, 10 years ago, and, I have this conversation with others that are of our age that have kids or fur babies or, just they think about it in the context of what comes next.
Mhm.
And for me, my daughter unfortunately has inherited a little bit of my asthma. Air quality for me is a big component to this journey. The climate conversation for me, when I think of my daughter and what comes next, I want her to know that regardless of what you do for a job, your second job will always be about being a piece of this conversation. So you could collect garbage for a living, but your conversation piece also needs to be about recycling. You could be an aerospace engineer, but the part of your conversation in that lane needs to be about responsible sourcing of materials. And how do we deepen our understanding of that impact? To be an engaged citizen, I was having this conversation the other day. I don't know if you remember if you had civics class when you were in school.
Totally, yeah.
And it's not just about how is a bill written or, the three branches of government, what it means, what globalism means. But much like art and music, a lot of schools have cut it. Civics class does not exist in a lot of school districts across the country. And I am a deep believer that to get back to a space of truly being engaged in informed citizenry, we've got to get back to a place where civics is a part of our DNA.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love it. I love it. Luis, thank you for joining us on this podcast. And we've talked a lot today about trajectories. I look forward to seeing where you end up because you have had a fantastic trajectory. And yeah.
Thank you, buddy. Well, who knows? I could very well end up in that rocking chair on the porch, eventually just yet. So fingers crossed we all make it there in a good way.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brad, for having me. It was a pleasure.
See ya. See ya.